Hi guys, Martin from TTC here. So, a few days ago, the UK's Global Travel Taskforce released its report setting out plans to get international travel restarted again. Now, the report was unfortunately pretty light on detail and it kicked the can down the road in several areas. I think it's pretty clear that public health is still obviously the government's priority, and they're very wary, I think, of putting the recovery in jeopardy. I counted the slogan safe, sustainable and robust at least 9 times in the document, which is a pretty impressive use of neuro-linguistic mind control, I think, even for this government. We got a bit of confirmation on their methodology. We finally had confirmation of this traffic light system that's been trailed in the press for a good few weeks now. We also had the introduction of this idea of a green watch list of countries that are heading in the wrong direction. In truth, though, it raised far more questions than it answered. And so here are 4 big questions we're hoping will be answered in the coming weeks. The first and most obvious question is which countries will be on which list when things finally open up. Given the speed that things seem to be changing, it's probably not worth speculating too much just yet, but we did get a bit of an idea on at least the decision-making methodology. So there'll be 4 key criteria that will be considered when deciding where to put countries. Firstly, there'll be the rate of vaccine rollout. Then they'll look at the infection rate in that country. They'll be looking at the prevalence of variants of concern, and then this idea of genomic sequencing, which is basically the believability, I think, of the data. Now, we understand the government will announce the lists in early May, which obviously doesn't give a lot of time for operators and airlines to get their programs going ready for the 17th. In fact, we've already seen some major operators pushing their start dates back to middle of June. I think, though, we also need to see whether the list will allow for any differentiation by region or by island. This is something we saw towards the end of last summer. That flexibility could really help some of the popular summer holiday destinations to recover more quickly. The second question is, how will the cost and the hassle of testing impact consumer demand? The cost of testing is easily the most talked about issue in the travel press, and for good reason. This data is from a Which Report study, and it shows the total cost of testing in both directions for travel to Greece, the United States and France, depending on whether they're a green country or an amber country at the time. There has been some welcome news, I think, in the last few days about pressure to reduce the cost of PCR testing for travellers, but there's no doubt that these sorts of costs will still stretch the budget of many travellers. Aside from even the cost, though, there's just the hassle factor. Arranging 5 separate tests for both the departure and the return flight could well be enough to dampen the enthusiasm, I think, of even the hardiest of travellers. The third question we're asking is, which part will digitisation play in this whole travel experience? And by digitisation, we're talking both about vaccine passports, but also digitisation of the passenger locator forms. On passports, I think there's been mixed messages. On the one hand, the government seems to be suggesting they won't be a feature, something we're insisting on. But the Global Travel Taskforce report implies that we'll invest in all of the necessary infrastructure to facilitate the requirements of other countries. So the position could easily change. On a more practical level, though, digitisation will be vital, I think, from a logistics point of view. There was a story in the news earlier this week that claimed that passengers are currently being forced to wait up to 6 hours to clear border controls at Heathrow Airport, and that's because of the amount of manual checks and testing and paper versions of the passenger locator forms and what have you. This is when Heathrow Airport's running at about 10% of capacity. Clearly that's totally unsustainable if travel volumes get back to anywhere near normality. Finally, we're waiting with bated breath to understand what will be on this COVID-19 passenger charter. There wasn't a huge amount of detail provided in the report, but judging by the language that they used, it appeared to focus on protecting consumers, clarifying their rights and urging the travel trade to be more flexible. I think this is something that's potentially very dangerous. Consumer rights already are enshrined in the package travel regulations and in other consumer protection legislation, and for the most part they've worked pretty well given the testing circumstances that we've all experienced. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a zero-sum game though. Additional rights to customers would come at a further cost and a risk to the already battered travel trade. Attempts to, say, clarify consumer refunding rights when a company moves from a green to an amber or a red, that could exacerbate the problems we've experienced last year, where travel organisers were the ones trapped between their regulatory responsibilities on the one hand and a lack of the corresponding rights to claim back monies from, say, airlines or other suppliers further up the supply chain. So plenty of questions still to be answered before we can get going again. We're awaiting further details, hopefully in the coming weeks, including confirmation that things can actually restart on the 17th of May. That hasn't been confirmed yet. But we'll have further updates when we hear more.